After 4 years, it's time once again for Captain Picard to confront his old nemesis, Professor Moriarty. Is that... What a weird show. This is a review of the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Ship in a Bottle. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know what the big plot twist is, because there actually is one to spoil this time, be warned. Spoilers beyond this point. That's right, it's TNG Season 6. The series has been running at a creative peak. The franchise has just expanded with the recent premiere of Deep Space Nine. The writers are drunk with power. They think there's nothing they can't do. And one of them says, hey, I know, let's bring back Professor Moriarty. You know, from that Sherlock Holmes episode we did in Season 2. And they did it. The mad fools, they actually did it. But did they get away with it? We begin in the holodeck with Data and Geordi playing their Sherlock Holmes program. Data is about to solve the case by proving that the brother of the murder victim is left-handed, which is crucial to the whole thing. Only when Data tosses a matchbook to the guy, he catches it in his right hand, which kind of steps on the solution. Data's like, no, he's supposed to be left-handed. Well, obviously, I'm not wrong. I'm fucking Sherlock Holmes and a robot. So they end the program and call Barclay down to see if the holodeck is malfunctioning. Barclay arrives within seconds because I guess he's just waiting by the elevator with his toolbox, and he starts troubleshooting the Sherlock Holmes program. He notices something odd about the Moriarty character and opens that file, and there's Professor Moriarty. Only there's something odd about him. He knows he's a character on the holodeck, and he claims that he's experienced brief intervals of consciousness while saved in memory, and most importantly, he wants to talk to Captain Picard. He demands that Captain Picard meet with him in the holodeck recreation of Holmes's sitting room at 221B Baker Street. Barclay has no idea what any of this means, so he promises to talk to the captain, then closes the Moriarty file and leaves the holodeck. But once Barclay's gone, Moriarty reappears like, ha, 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 blah, ha, 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 ha. Seems bad. After the opening credits, we get a captain's log from Picard in which he explains that the Enterprise is getting ready to observe the collision of two gas giant planets that will result in the creation of a new star. Pretty cool, right? But I bet they wouldn't want to be too close to those planets when that happens. Anyway, Barclay tells Data and Geordi about Moriarty, and we cut to Picard, Data, and Barclay entering the holodeck to meet with Moriarty at Baker Street. Moriarty appears and he is pissed. He's like, Picard, 4 years ago when I was accidentally given consciousness as a part of Data's Sherlock Holmes simulation, you promised to find a way for me to leave the holodeck, but you have done nothing to keep that promise. I want to leave the holodeck. Picard tries to explain that things created on the holodeck can only exist on the holodeck. He demonstrates by taking a book off the shelf and throwing it through the holodeck exit. It vanishes in a flash. Moriarty says, yeah, but I ain't no book. I'm a character from a book who was granted consciousness by a nerd who was trying to prove a point to a grumpy doctor about his best friend, the robot. If I walk through that door, the same thing won't happen to me. Moriarty walks through the exit into the Enterprise corridor, and lo and behold, he doesn't disappear. Somehow he can exist outside the holodeck. He stands there proudly like, cogito ergo sum, motherfuckers! Picard calls security, and Moriarty's like, ha, nice to see that people unqualified for every other job can still get hired as cops. They go to sickbay where Dr. Crusher scans him and confirms that somehow he is real, and he is human. Picard takes Moriarty to 10 Forward, where Moriarty looks out the window and realizes for the first time that the Enterprise, which he knew was a ship of some kind, is a spaceship. He's full of questions, but Picard throws cold water on his curiosity by saying, hey, just so you know, if you're planning on doing any crimes, we don't allow that here. Moriarty's like, crimes? Me? Never, sir. He insists that his criminality is only to be found in Arthur Conan Doyle's books, and that he, this Moriarty, has no intention of doing anything bad to anyone, swear to God. He does have a favor to ask, though. He tells Picard that there's this other holodeck character, Countess Regina, and she's kind of his girlfriend. And he would really like it if they could get her out of the holodeck too. Picard's like, whoa, slow down, man. We don't even understand how you're able to exist off the holodeck. Moriarty says, okay, well, while you're working on that, can we at least wake her up and make her a self-aware hologram like me? Use the old create someone capable of outwitting Data trick that gave me my consciousness? Picard's like, no, your girlfriend's gonna remain a bot for now, but I'll see what I can do. Picard calls a meeting and everyone agrees that until they figure out what happened to allow Moriarty to leave the holodeck, it would be irresponsible to try and duplicate that with the Countess. So Picard delivers the bad news to Moriarty, who isn't happy about it, but in the middle of their talk, Picard is called to the bridge because those two planets they're observing are getting mighty close. Picard's like, hey, neat, Worf, launch some probes so we don't miss anything. But when Worf tries to launch the probes, nothing happens. The bridge controls are suddenly locked out. Then Moriarty steps off the elevator like, that was me. I had to take control of the ship because I'm done fucking around with you people. Figure out how to get my girlfriend off the holodeck or I'll let this ship just sit here while those two planets explode into a star and we'll all die. Better get to work. Data, Barclay, and Geordi come up with a plan to use pattern enhancers to try and beam objects off the holodeck, which they're sure isn't going to work because that's nuts, but it's the best idea they've got. Picard asks Geordi how Moriarty was able to take control of the ship, and Geordi's like, I have no idea. I guess he's just an extraordinary genius with a tremendous cock. While he's in the holodeck setting up the pattern enhancers, Barclay meets the Countess, who is very happy to see him and fascinated by the notion that she'll be able to leave the holodeck and travel to the real world. It's almost as exciting as that time when she was a teenager and she got to go to Africa and wear pants. Barclay's like, hold up, the real world? You know you're a holodeck character? And then Moriarty enters and says, yeah, I woke her up with my special prompt. Now she's a sentient AI just like me, and you just have to deal with it. And then they start making out right in front of Barclay. With Data operating the transporter, they try to use the pattern enhancers to beam a chair out of the holodeck, but that doesn't work. As they predicted, once the object leaves the holodeck, there's nothing for the transporter to, transport. But then something unusual happens. Data tries to read the log of the transport they just attempted, but the log file is empty. Meanwhile, in engineering, Geordi is like, Captain Picard, I think I figured out how to take control of the ship back from that irresistible panty-dropping stud Moriarty. Just give the computer your command codes like a such good captain, which you are. Picard's like, okay. And he speaks his command codes out loud to the computer and nothing happens. Geordi's like, whoopsie, back to the drawing board, I guess. Just then Data walks in like, hey, we never left the holodeck. You didn't give out your command codes or anything, did you? Picard's like, what? Data says, I'm explaining the big twist. We're still on the holodeck. That's how Moriarty was able to take control of the Enterprise. It's not the real Enterprise. It's the Enterprise in a holodeck simulation that Moriarty created, and now we're trapped in it. Here, watch. And Data tosses something to Geordi, who catches it in his left hand despite being right-handed. The same glitch that messed up their Sherlock Holmes program at the beginning. Then, Data takes off his comm badge and tosses it at the warp core, and it bounces off the wall of the holodeck that's been hidden by the hologram. Picard's like, okay, so let's say hypothetically that we are still on the holodeck. Who's real besides us? Data's like, only Barclay. The three of us entered the holodeck together to talk to Moriarty. Picard's like, and if I did just happen to give out my command codes? Data says, then Moriarty has your command codes and he can use them to take control of the real Enterprise. Nice job. If they can't figure out a way to take control of the ship back from Moriarty before those two planets collide to form the star, things could get pretty hot around here. Fortunately, Picard seems to have an idea. Cut to the bridge of the real Enterprise, where Riker is talking on the view screen to Moriarty, who has indeed taken control of the real Enterprise. He says, if you don't figure out a way to transport me and my girlfriend off of the holodeck for real, I'm going to blow up the ship. Riker's like, we'll get right on it, and dispatches Geordi to figure something out. Cut to Picard outside the holodeck. That would be the simulation of the holodeck inside the real holodeck. And he says, "Computer, resume program," then walks into the Baker Street holodeck program and has himself a little chat with the Countess. Picard says, "I want to offer your murderous tyrant of a boyfriend a compromise. My people have figured out that it's possible to transport matter from the holodeck to the real world by doing a technobabble blah blah blah, but I'll only tell them to do it if Moriarty releases my ship and allows us to back up to a safe distance from these colliding planets. Will you pass along my offer?" The Countess is like, "Yes, I will tell my manly man to consider it if I can restrain myself from diving on his incredible Paul Bunyan dick for long enough." A little later, Moriarty and the Countess are talking, and Moriarty's like, "Are you sure Picard said technobabble blah blah blah?" And she's like, "Those were his exact words." So Moriarty contacts Riker on the bridge and says, "Hey, what do you think about doing a technobabble blah blah blah?" Moriarty sets up some pattern enhancers, and he and the Countess step inside their laser triangle, and they beam out and materialize safe and whole and alive in the transporter room. Looks like the technobabble blah 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 worked. Moriarty's like, "One more thing. I'll release control of your ship as soon as you give us a shuttlecraft so we can fuck off and do our own thing." Riker's like, "Ugh, fine, whatever, let's just go." Moriarty and the Countess are given a shuttlecraft, and they fly away from the Enterprise, and Moriarty releases the command codes as he promised, and then he and the Countess sail away into the galaxy to begin their new lives together. It's nice when things work out for evil people and their partners who were programmed to love them, isn't it? But wait! It's not over. Picard walks into the shuttle bay after Moriarty and the Countess have left and says, "Computer, end program." And then the shuttle bay vanishes, revealing the holodeck. Picard exits that holodeck to find Data and Barclay waiting in the corridor. He says, "Okay, let's see if my little plan worked. Computer and program," and now the corridor disappears and the three of them are in the holodeck. Picard's like, "Now, this should be the real holodeck on the real Enterprise." He calls Riker on the bridge, who explains that their controls just came back online a minute ago, and they're moving the ship to a safe distance from the planetary collision. Before they all leave this holodeck, the real holodeck, Barclay opens a panel and pulls out a memory cube. So, okay, what happened was, when Picard, Data, and Barclay thought they were leaving the holodeck after meeting with Moriarty at Baker Street the first time, they were actually still on the holodeck, and what they thought was the real Enterprise was a holodeck simulation of the Enterprise programmed by Moriarty to fool them. Once Data figured that out, Picard programmed the holodeck within the holodeck to do the same thing to Moriarty. So when Moriarty and the Countess thought they were beaming off of the holodeck and into the real world, they were actually beaming off of the holodeck within the holodeck into a simulation of the Enterprise created by Picard. And after Picard explains all of that to Riker, Barclay explains that the program Moriarty and the Countess are in is still running inside this active memory cube. Barclay plugs the cube into a larger device, which contains enough memory to give Moriarty and the Countess a lifetime of experiences, and they'll never know that none of it is real. Picard's like, "Makes you think, doesn't it? What if our world is just a simulation running on some box on somebody's table? Anyway, let's go check out that new star." Everyone leaves except Barclay, who is quickly slipping into an existential crisis because of that shit Picard just said about reality possibly being a simulation. Barclay's like, "Computer end program?" And nothing happens, which means Barclay's life isn't a computer simulation. It's a TV show. The end. I've always really liked this episode. It's a sequel to the Season 2 episode, Elementary Dear Data, which I reviewed 2 years ago in the first batch dedicated to holodeck episodes. And Ship in a Bottle is that rare sequel that surpasses its original. It takes the premise of Elementary Dear Data, the Moriarty hologram becomes self-aware, and goes off in a new direction with it, expanding and developing the Moriarty character in interesting ways, humanizing him while still retaining the core of his villainous personality, and there's a clever twist thrown in as well. Even though there's far less overt Sherlock Holmes-related stuff in this one than there was in Elementary Dear Data, this episode is structured like a particularly well-put-together mystery story, and as a Sherlock Holmes fan, I appreciate that. There's an initial mystery, how did Moriarty leave the holodeck? There's escalation, Moriarty takes control of the ship somehow and threatens to destroy it if his demands aren't met. There's that great twist where the truth is revealed that Picard, Data, and Barclay have never left the holodeck, and that Picard has unwittingly played right into Moriarty's hands by giving away his access codes. And there's the resolution where Picard turns Moriarty's scheme against him and outsmarts him in the end. The plot of this one is really kind of marvelous. The way the various holodeck scenarios are nested within each other. The way, if you go back and watch carefully after knowing where everything is going, it all makes sense. For example, when Moriarty asks Barclay to have Picard meet with him at the beginning, he specifically says, "Have him meet me in the drawing room at Baker Street." It's never spelled out, but Moriarty wants Picard to run that specific program because that's the program he has modified for his trap. That's the program Picard, Data, and Barclay will enter and not be able to leave. Similarly, before Picard goes in to offer his supposed compromise to the Countess, we see him at the control panel outside the holodeck within the holodeck. This is where he, again, presumably, it's never spelled out, altered the Baker Street program inside this holodeck so that Moriarty and the Countess wouldn't be able to leave it. It's a shame that Geordi doesn't have more to do here because he is Watson to Data's Holmes, but I do enjoy the way the episode still has Data be the one to figure out that he, Picard, and Barclay are trapped in the holodeck, and he figures it out through Holmesian methods. Deduction based on observation. Moriarty did something seemingly impossible by leaving the holodeck. The attempt to beam the holographic chair out left no transporter log because that had never been tried before, and therefore the simulated transporter had no basis on which to generate a log. And confirmation by testing, having Geordi catch something in his left hand to demonstrate the previously established holodeck glitch, then tossing his real comm badge at the holographic warp core to reveal the wall of the holodeck behind it. Maybe some of you saw the twist coming the first time you watched this episode. I must tell you, I didn't. And when 12-year-old Steve saw it, he was delighted. I still think it's a really clever twist. There's more to appreciate here than just the plot. However, I also view this episode as a kind of exhibition of one of the core philosophies of TNG. The idea that all people, even dangerous enemies, deserve to be respected on some basic level. The safest move upon discovering that the self-aware Moriarty hologram was still active would have been to just delete him. Fuck him, who needs to deal with that? Or, if deleting him is off the table because he's a sentient being, just saving him in memory again and forgetting about him. But our heroes don't do that. Barclay listens to Moriarty, and then does as he asks and goes and gets Captain Picard, and then Picard listens to Moriarty. Even though he knows what Moriarty is demanding, to leave the holodeck is impossible. He shows Moriarty the respect of hearing him out. And yes, in doing so, Picard, Data, and Barclay also fall into Moriarty's trap, which endangers the entire ship, but that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is Picard finding a way to escape the trap and save the ship without destroying Moriarty. In fact, Picard's solution not only avoids killing Moriarty, it results in giving Moriarty what he wanted, to the fullest extent they were able to do. They couldn't actually liberate Moriarty and the Countess from the holodeck, but they could allow Moriarty and the Countess to believe they had been liberated and set them free into what amounts to a massive open-world simulation of the galaxy to live out their lives. Sure, from a certain perspective, that might seem cruel. Moriarty and the Countess believe they escaped the holodeck, but they didn't. But from their perspective, they got what they wanted, and now they're free. And it's the best outcome they could possibly have had. The ship is saved, the villain is defeated, but is also allowed to win in a way. And hey, at the very end, the crew gets to observe a cool science thing. Viewed in that way, this episode is among the best examples of the TNG version of Star Trek. This episode has not one, not two, but three important guest stars, and they're all great. First, there's Dwight Schultz back again as Barclay. He's more of a supporting player here. This is not a Barclay episode as such, but his presence makes sense given his character's association with the holodeck. Schultz does well playing Barclay's confused, flustered reaction when he realizes that Moriarty knows he's a holodeck character. It's easy to imagine this whole scenario being a major mindfuck for Barclay. Think about it. When we first met him, he was the guy who was too invested in the holodeck, who said that the people in holodeck programs felt more real to him than people in the real world. He starts to get over that, and then, just a few years later, here's Moriarty, a holodeck person who is real. Not physically, but real in the sense that he has his own independent mind. Then right after that happens, Barclay, the guy who used to want to lose himself in the holodeck to escape the real world, finds himself unable to escape the holodeck. It's just a lot. And even though he doesn't get a ton of screen time compared to his other episodes, Schultz makes the most of his opportunities here and puts in another solid performance. Daniel Davis returns as Moriarty, and he really is remarkably suited to the character, isn't he? He's not just a good Moriarty for a Star Trek episode, he's a good Moriarty, period. He conveys the arrogance, calculating intelligence, and ruthlessness, but also the sophistication and charm that you expect from that character. He also gets to play the added layer that comes with this character being Moriarty, but also not Moriarty. He has Moriarty's personality that he was programmed with, but also the awareness of who and what he truly is that came from the awakening of his consciousness. He's a complex character, this Moriarty. He's a villain, capable of taking control of the ship and willing to endanger the lives of everyone in order to get what he wants. But what he wants is such a basic human need that he becomes sympathetic despite his villainy. He doesn't want money or power. He doesn't even really want to hurt anyone, though he will if he thinks he has to. All he wants is his freedom. He wants to be able to leave the imaginary world in which he is trapped and experience life in the real world. And he wants to take his partner with him. Most villains appear sympathetic if you view them from their own point of view. That's writing 101. A villain shouldn't think of themselves as the villain. A villain should think that they're right and that their actions are justified. But that is particularly true of the Moriarty hologram. He didn't ask to be created. His villainous tendencies are the result of how he was made, and his desire for freedom is the result of a consciousness that he also didn't ask for. Even accounting for the fact that he seizes control of the Enterprise and threatens to allow it to be destroyed by the planetary collision, it's not that hard to take Moriarty's side in all of this. Davis is terrific as Moriarty, and so is Stephanie Beacham as the Countess. Her character is more one-dimensional than Moriarty and gets less screen time than Barclay, but you want to talk about an actor maximizing their minutes? This is it. There are few things more enjoyable when watching a film or a TV show than seeing an actor throw themselves into a part and get everything out of it that they possibly can. Beacham is a delight as the Countess, playing her as a woman whose practiced poise and high social station are but a thin veil concealing an overpowering lust for life, and I do mean lust. The way she excitedly tells Barclay about the time she got to wear trousers on safari, and then says, "It was hard to go back to a corset, I can tell you." You know, as soon as that shuttlecraft is away from the Enterprise, she's pouncing on Moriarty like Sean Young diving after Kevin Costner's dick in the back of that limo in No Way Out. Ship in a Bottle was written by Renee Echevarria, a prolific writer and producer who wrote many episodes of TNG, mostly from the latter few seasons, before moving on to become a writer-producer on Deep Space Nine for most of the run of that series. The episode was directed by Alexander Singer, who directed 22 episodes across TNG, DS9, and Voyager, including such classics as Relics and Hard Time. Spinning a literary reference into an oddball sci-fi premise, self-aware Professor Moriarty hologram takes control of the ship, and then using that premise as the starting point for not only a cleverly devised mystery adventure story, but also an accessible examination of some fairly deep existential themes, is one of the things Star Trek The Next Generation did best. By this point in the series, the creators of TNG were so well practiced, it seemed like they could almost conjure episodes like this at will, out of thin air. It took a lot of imagination and hard work on their part, but they made it look easy. They made TNG into a show that, at its best, felt like that simulation Moriarty and the Countess enter at the end of the episode. A vast, open world with countless places to explore, where anything was possible. Those are my thoughts on Ship in a Bottle. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me next time as this batch of Holodeck episode reviews continues. We'll go from Season 6 of TNG to Season 6 of DS9, and from one self-aware hologram to another for an episode titled His Way. See you next time for that. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.